Good day everyone. This morning we are going to discuss about designing binary choice item for higher order thinking skills. So this presentation is actually the continuation of the topic binary choice items. Before we will proceed into our discussion, let us have an activity first. So directions. Carefully read each binary assessment question provided for each item. Determine whether it assesses higher order thinking skills or lower order thinking skills based on Bloom's taxonomy. Write HOTS if the question promotes analysis, evaluation, or creation, and LOTS if only requires remembering, understanding, or applying. Be ready to justify your answer. So you are required to write your answer in a one-fourth piece of paper, and don't worry about the explanation because you are going to justify it on a face-to-face basis. So here's our activity. You can also try answering it at the same time determining whether it assesses higher order thinking skills or lower order thinking skills. To start our discussion, let us read first our objectives for today. At the end of this lesson, students will be able to distinguish between binary choice items that assess lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. Second, construct a binary choice items that targets analysis, evaluation, creation levels in Bloom's taxonomy. We have here the aspects to consider in making higher order thinking skills binary items. So the following are: avoid simple recalling, question framing, start with complex concept, encourage reasoning or justification, use questions with context of real world applications, and avoid learning or bias questions. Let's discuss them one by one, starting with avoid simple recalling. So, simple recalling only processes or retrieves basic facts and definition. So, it doesn't really require higher order thinking skills. It only belongs to the lower order thinking skills because it is just recalling. So, our goal is to make a binary choice item that is considered to be in the higher order thinking skills. So we have to make sure that our students think that goes beyond memorization, and let us challenge them to analyze and evaluate. So we have here our example. In the lower order thinking skills, you can see it is just a basic recall. It will not develop students' deep understanding about the topic. So to make sure that our students will develop higher order thinking skills, we have to create a question that will be able them to analyze at the same time to evaluate the question. So it is very important to avoid recalling. Next is we have question framing. When we say question framing, this is a method wherein we create a question based on how we want our students to think. Since our goal is to create higher order thinking skills, we have to create our question wherein our students will be able to analyze, evaluate, at the same time create. Let's look at our example here. And the lower order thinking skill, you can see that the question framing there only focuses on the lower level of Bloom's taxonomy, wherein it focuses on basic recall at the same time basic understanding. Unlike in higher order thinking skills, our question framing focuses on the higher level of Bloom's taxonomy, wherein students will be able to analyze, evaluate, at the same time create. And you can start a question framing in higher order thinking skills if you're going to create a binary question with the words can, does, should, or is it possible. Let us move on. So the next one is we have start with a complex concept. In relation to question framing, we will not be able to develop questions that will assess higher order thinking skills of our student without starting with a concept that is complex enough to develop that higher order thinking skills. Let's look at our example. As you can see in the lower order thinking skills, it is not complex enough. So how can we create a question that is complex enough to in order for us to assess higher order thinking skills? We can start with connecting two different topics. Let's say for example biodiversity and ecosystem. in our example of higher order thinking skills, you can see it there. So you can start by connecting two topics, or you can start by making our students ask about the steps on how to do things or an application. The next part is encouragement of justification or reasoning. So it is common among binary choice item questions that it ends with a yes or no question. But unfortunately, this type of question doesn't help the teacher to assess the process of thinking of her students. So for the teacher, especially if the teacher is trying to achieve a higher order thinking skills for their students. So for the teacher to be able to do that, they have to encourage their students to justify and reason out their answers. In our example, the lower order thinking skill is a yes or no question. It is the same with higher order thinking skills, but we can replace the yes or no with a agree or disagree. At the same time, we can also add a why question for us to encourage our students to justify their answer and to reason out. The next thing that we should consider is the use of question with context of real world application. It is very important for our students to connect classroom learning to their life outside the school, for them to develop critical thinking in solving problems in their everyday life situation. So, how are we going to create a question that applies a real world solution at the same time developing our students' higher order thinking skills? So, let's look at our example. On the lower order thinking skill, there is no real world application. It is just a basic question, a basic recall. In higher order thinking skills, you can see a real world problem wherein students will be required to analyze the problem and apply their learnings inside the classroom to address that problem. So the last thing that we should consider in creating a binary choice item is to avoid leading or biased question. Because if we are going to create this type of question, we are suggesting a correct answer to our students. That will not help them to think on their own. It basically means that you are developing a lower order thinking skills. You can see it here in our example on the lower order thinking skills. It is a question where there is a cue. The cue is the word agree. So you are trying to lead your students to create an assumption that the answer is yes. It is very important for us to avoid this type of question because it will increase the probability of the student to guess, because you are giving them a assumption that the other answer is the best answer. So for us to develop our students higher order thinking skills, we have to make sure that there is no cue in creating these questions. Before ending this presentation, we will have another activity. So directions, choose a familiar topic and create three binary yes or no or true or false question. So this topic, you can choose a science related topic. So the next one is you have to focus on the analysis, the evaluation and the creation of your student base your question on the Bloom's taxonomy, and it should be a higher order thinking skills binary choice item question. So that's it. Thank you for your cooperation.